Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're watching or listening to this, and welcome to this week's episode of the Non-Identity Podcast. Now, this week we're joined by a doctor, an author, a podcast host, and the founder of the Welcome to Humanity movement. It's Dr. Fred Moss. Hi, Fred. Welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. It's really a pleasure.
Before we get into your many adventures, can you just explain to people who you are and where you grew up?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Dr. Fred, or I suppose Dr. Moss is another name. And I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, here in the USA. I was there for about, I'd say, roughly about almost 30 years. Um, I guess it's closer to 26 years. And then I had a job the last 5 years there working with children in a child and adolescent state hospital. And from there, I realized I wanted to go to medical school and be a doctor. So I ended up going to Chicago, Illinois to study medicine and got my MD degree there. And then I did a residency up in Cincinnati, Ohio, also in the Midwestern US. And then I raised my own two children in Cincinnati, and from there I had a wildly successful practice, private practice in Cincinnati, Ohio. And when I dropped that, I became a traveling doctor, and I was all over the United States doing medicine, doing psychiatry in multiple different arenas and modalities around the United States. And then after that, I chose to go around the world and start doing this stuff from different parts of the world. I did it from Thailand and Nepal and Bhutan and Israel, France, England indeed, and also Italy, using telepsychiatry. And so I now live in Northern California with my lovely wife and my three cats. And I'm still a doctor, but I call myself the undoctor because I spend time often taking people off of their perceived diagnoses and off of their medications and treatments because they don't usually work as well as we hope they would, and then giving them their life back so they can live a powerful life just the way they are.
That's brilliant. And what was it about working with the young people that made you want to go into medicine? Because I'm a teacher and I get so much enjoyment and fulfillment about working with young people. Was it the same sort of thing for you?
Yeah, it's same thing exactly. What happened was that I had gone to college a couple times. I had after high school, joined up at college and I tried engineering school for a little while and then dropped out of that. And then my family and friends convinced me to go back because there was this new industry coming up, and that was called computers. You may have heard of them. And so, yeah, they thought that that would be a future in computers. So I went back and studied computers for a little bit. But back then, computers were a lot different than they are now. And that didn't tickle my fancy much. So I dropped out of that as well. And then I got a job working with children and adolescents. And there is when I really realized that I could communicate effectively to cause healing. Because at the center of all healing is in fact a human connection. And that's what I learned there. And that's what propelled me to know that I could actually communicate for a living. And I knew that I could do that if I became a psychiatrist, and I would also be in some ways at the top or near the top of the totem pole, so allowed to make my own decisions. That's what I was hoping for. So I pursued one more time to come through college and finish my degree and then go to medical school, as I already stated. Yeah, that's how that went.
And as you said earlier as well, you travelled around the world practicing medicine. What differences did you find in different cultures and stuff when it comes to medicine?
Yeah, so I practiced psychiatry as I went around, and met a lot of people, a lot of clinicians, a lot of patients or clients, a lot of family members and caregivers, a lot of, philosophers, and I had multiple discussions about it. Mental health has a different definition culture by culture. And it's very interesting that mental illness also, therefore, has a different definition culture by culture, which means that mental illness is a variable and is really made up. It's actually made up by where you are. And it's a product of, the culture that you're in at the time that the diagnoses or the complaints actually occur. So what might be seen as a mental health diagnosis in, Sacramento, California, might not even be seen as a mental health diagnosis in London, England, and it certainly might not be seen that way in Zimbabwe or seen that way in Australia. So we have different definitions for what mental illness and what mental health are around the world. And, sometimes it's the same condition can be seen as a gift in one place where it's seen as a curse in another place. what this really means ultimately is that there is no definition for mental illness, because, when there's a definition, like if I have a broken arm and I go to Singapore, you can bet I still have a broken arm in Singapore. If I have, if I have a fever and I go to Singapore, I have a fever there too, whether it's in Tibet or in Reykjavik or wherever I go. But with mental illness, it's so variable that it's clearly just made up. And because it's really just made up culture by culture, it's subject to profound and thorough transformation as a concept. If we don't even know what it means to be mentally healthy, we're pretty audacious to suggest that we understand what it means to be mentally ill. And that's why I really moved into being an undoctor. The idea being that maybe there's nothing wrong with you. Like, even if you're totally uncomfortable, even if you're having a miserable life experience, even if, what you feel like seems to be odd, different, or maybe representative of an illness or a deficiency, maybe it's not. Maybe you're just being human, living the life that you were given, and there might be nothing wrong with your mental health at all. Now, the thing that's really important here is if you start taking the medicines that they provide here in the Western culture for your disease, there easily could be something wrong with you, but typically that's actually caused or at least perpetuated or increased by the medications itself. And that's how the undoctor got his name. The idea, again, being if we could unmedicate people, we often can take away their diagnoses or even their symptoms that led them to believe there was something wrong with them in the first place.
And do you feel like the Western world pushes medication onto people because it's a big business?
So I don't know, it's a big statement. It's certainly a big business, and it's more than just money. There's incentives from every position. Like the doctor doesn't make necessarily more money if he prescribes medicine, but he isn't really allowed to see you unless he prescribes medicine. So he has to come up with a diagnosis. And in that diagnosis, once he comes up with it, there's already been some design of some treatment in the form of medicine that was created by some drug company somewhere. So and this doctor has already learned what he's listening for when he's doing the examination to have him choose X, Y, or Z medicine. So when a doctor chooses a medicine, it isn't that he is making more money. It's certainly big business. Look, the profit margin, simple profit margin in the psychopharmacological drugs day by day is estimated to be over $1 billion. That's per day profit margin. That suggests that this is not really a legitimate industry, because no industry should be making $1 billion a day in profit alone. And especially for people who can't afford these things, or for whatever reason have to take out loans, or have some form of subadequate insurance or whatever it is. The idea here is that, yes, money drives this industry, as it drives many industries, but it's the business model itself that is most interesting, because if the medicines are actually increasing, perpetuating, or causing the symptoms they're marketed to treat, my goodness, that is like the best business model ever created by any human. And I wish I would have designed it, because you're going to have a free flow of clients that way, who are coming in thinking they're getting the treatment for the condition they have. And although they do get a superficial or a temporary relief from their conditions, frequently it causes that condition to increase. But if not that condition, then other conditions to arise, in which case, when those other conditions arise, you think you have a new condition, and boom, off to new medicines, and the cycle continues.
Exactly. And why do you think there's a stigma around mental illness?
Well, it's a really interesting question. The stigma around mental illness, what is that? People are seem there's like an incentive to be embarrassed by feeling less than whole. Like if somehow I feel like I'm extra anxious, or I have depression, or I have attention deficit disorder, or if I even am hearing voices, or maybe my thoughts are moving too fast, or I'm too scattered, or I'm not good in a social environment, all of those things, or has something happened in the past that I can't get rid of, or all of those things that happen, that are frequently labeled mental illnesses. We've been taught that we're supposed to be embarrassed by that. We've been taught that you're supposed to keep that to yourself, that you're supposed to only present something that's not so-called defective, or we all have character defects. We all have deficiencies. We all have things that we do a little bit less well than other things. We're better than some people, better than most in some things, and then we're worse than most in some things, and then we're great at some things, and then we're terrible at some things. And you know what that's called? That's called the condition of being a human being.
Yep.
That's just natural. So somehow the stigma thing, I wonder how I've wondered recently as this week, is how stigma has ever become a thing in the first place. And it's because we've been encouraged to keep that to ourselves as if there's something to be embarrassed about. And then when we do that, then people actually embarrass us, like, oh, maybe we don't have to take your opinion seriously, or maybe we don't have to hire you, or maybe we can't trust you, or maybe something like that. So you don't want to reveal your sense of defectiveness publicly because you're afraid that people will have second thoughts about who you are, which in fact many people do. And so you protect yourself by pretending that that's not there, and that's called stigma.
Yeah, no, exactly. I also think as well, a lot of people hear the word mental health and see it as a negative, but they don't realise we all have mental health. Like body health, we have good days and bad days. So when you are having a bad day, it is, as you just said, it is normal, it's human. But the moment you're having a bad day, everyone's like, I've got mental health. Well, you've got it all the time. So it's just about being aware of where you're at in your health cycle, like you would be with your body cycle.
Yeah, it's interesting that inadvertently you just did something that the public has learned how to do, and that was you equated the word mental health with mental illness, and that frequently happens. We say we have mental health. Actually, if you have mental health, it's all good, man. That
Exactly.
just means you're healthy. That's good. You're all right. We all have we have mental health. And what's happened is that mental health and mental illness have been collapsed on each other. So when people say the word mental health, you think about mentally ill people. And it's not really the case because we all have mentality, that's obvious. And when we're thinking healthily or actually behaving ourselves a way that we would want to, or that the public is calling us on us to behave, that's called mental health. Mental illness, on the other hand, is much more variable, as I just discussed, culture to culture, specific to specific, circumstance to circumstance, situation to situation. Mental illness is a variable. And since we really honestly do not have a universal understanding of what it means to be mentally healthy, it really does take some kahungas, right, to actually to declare out loud that we know what mental illness is. Normally, what mental illness really is outside the range of the diagnoser's understanding of how things should go. So, if I meet you and you're outside of my range of what I expect to be called normal, my own personal experience of what normal is, then if I'm a diagnoser, I have the liberty to then give you a diagnosis and call you odd, different, or diseased.
Yeah.
But the truth is, you might not be odd, different, or diseased at all. You might just be outside the range of what that diagnoser is comfortable with. And that's the only way that people get diagnoses. Sometimes, there's like criteria in the DSM or other books that label what type of diagnoses are out there, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. But even these criteria are so vague and really difficult to address and difficult um, to quantify. And most people really don't use the DSM anyways. So they hear different buzzwords like, oh, I have racing thoughts. Oh, you must have bipolar disorder. Oh, I can't complete tasks. Oh, you must have ADHD. Oh, I'm very sad today. Oh, you must have major depression. Oh, I respond to the voices in my head. Oh, you must have schizophrenia. They don't really use the strict criteria anyways. And most clinicians, I dare say, are not familiar, like in any real way, with the criterias and how many different check marks have to happen in order to make a diagnosis. But even if they were, that whole statistical manual is questionable and suspect in the first place, for sure.
Yeah, I don't know what it's like over in the States, but here in the UK, mental health the last couple of years, or mental illness has been a big thing that everyone needs to jump on to go and help and stuff. Do you feel like that is the lack of understanding what mental health actually is? That it's easy to categorize people and put them in boxes.
Yeah, I do. I think that, and what there's a lot of things, it's really, you've noticed that we've been placed in boxes a lot in the last 5 or 10 years. You think
Yeah,
this, and therefore you don't think that. It's a divisive way to separate and conquer, is one way to do it. But another thing about mental health and mental illness is, when you're not feeling right, or when you repetitively do something that you're ashamed of, or you feel guilty, or regret later, it's fun, it's proper, it's, if I can hang that on something else besides myself, I'm eager to do that. If I could say, oh,
yeah,
that wasn't me, that's my ADHD. That wasn't me, that's my PTSD, or whatever alphabet soup is out there. Like, I can then say, oh, that wasn't me, that was this thing that caused it. If it would have been up to me, I would have done it differently. But I have this disease or illness or deficiency. I'm defective. And therefore, that's why I continue to do things that I regret. Instead of getting that us humans do stuff that we regret. That's called being human too. And we do it repetitively, even if we learn. Like, if I, hurt my wife with words, I might do it again. Unfortunately, I might tell her I'm sorry and not do it again. I might do it again. Or if I do something self-sabotaging or self-destructive, maybe addictions. They get called addictions. If I do something that inadvertently, or even intentionally hurt somebody, I might do it again. And if I do it again, I'd love to be able to hang that on a diagnosis instead of taking responsibility for the ineffective human that I am.
exactly. Pass it
Yeah.
on. Yeah, no, yeah, totally agree with that. Also, obviously with COVID and the world locking down, how much do you think that had an impact on us as a society? Because obviously
Mhm.
human nature is to be very tribal, and then all of a sudden we got locked away for 2 years, and then we've expected to go out and reintegrate. Do you feel like being locked away during COVID did cause a massive impact on people's mental health and illness as a society?
Well, unquestionably, the whole pandemic idea had a massive impact on people's psyche, individually and collectively. There became a larger barrier between what we think us are and what we think them are. So us and them got separated, and it wasn't clear boundaries at all. So you might think A, B, and C like the us people do, and then you might think D like the they people do, but you can't compensate for it. You can't reconcile that. So you think A, B, and C just like those people do, but you think D, E, and F like those people do. And you don't know anybody who thinks A, B, C like you don't know anybody who thinks like you do. And so there's a real separateness. There's a real tendency on the second side, on the backside of this pandemic event that took place here for the number of years. That has us being individualized and feeling like there's something wrong with us. Also, there's a great deal of sadness and despair and grief that took place during this time, as many of us lost friends. If they didn't die, I'm not really even speaking to that, but friends stopped talking to us, or the way that we were was no longer the same as we could no longer communicate. The masks, that people wore made it so that we couldn't see their mouths and we couldn't actually communicate effectively. So there was a tremendous gap in communication that took place during those years. And during those years, with the gap of masks, and with the learned behavior of not listening to somebody who disagrees with you and diametrically opposed to you on a particular issue, where you then reject the person all aboard, like, all in rejection of the person because they said X about Y. There was tremendous fractures everywhere in the world of communication among people, not only in the same across the world, but in their same country, or in the same state, or even in the same home.
Yeah,
There was tremendous fractures, and without communication, nothing works. So, at the heart of all healing, which I mentioned earlier when I learned as a child and adolescent worker, is in fact a human connection. And the whole notion of human connection got beaten up pretty hard between 2020 and 2023, or even up to this year. And it continues to get beaten up hard. Now, along another point, you could make a case that pre-COVID, like before COVID became a thing, there was already fracturing going on that was might have even led to the divisiveness and the collapse of communication that was already ready. It was already like launched. It was already incubating, and it took place so easily. It was like a free fall to learn how to hate each other.
Yeah,
And a new level of hate arose. And of course, there's nothing mentally healthy about hating either another person or a group of people. That's not called mental health. Hatred is one of those things that doesn't really fly and doesn't make a society work. Now, without effective communication, without actually hearing people for who they really are, um, is that if people can't speak their true voice, then none of the issues in the world will ever be solved. And we're toast. We're done. It's over. If we can't actually get on the other side and listen to the people who disagree with us, because there's a whole group of people who do, then it doesn't matter whether there's climate change or racism or sex trafficking or or even COVID. None of that even matters anymore if we can't even communicate effectively to address the issues. So without communication as a whole, the group called human race took a pretty big shot during these last several years, for sure, in the world of mental health.
no, exactly. And obviously, throughout your travels, have come to the realization that speaking truth, communicating, and listening is where love arises from. What brought you to that conclusion?
Oh, it just seems like it's totally obvious. It's not something that anybody would argue with. Ultimately, there's nobody here who would argue with that. Like, I knew that when I was 3. I remember vividly when I was in my playpen, I had 2 brothers. They were 10 and 14 years older than me, and I used to watch them, speaking with my parents and be so enchanted and interested in communication. But I really knew that it was communication that was really making the world go round. And maybe people taught me that, but it was very obvious. And what I wanted to do more than anything was to communicate. I knew that that's really where health was. And I think every one of us actually knows that, and certainly knew that as a child. We want to be with people, want to talk to people, we want to play with people, we want to learn from people, we want to read, we want to, maybe create with people. We want to get along with each other. And it became very clear that the only thing that could distilled out culture to culture, what was very obvious is that if someone healed about anything, it always was a direct function of a human connection somewhere in the line. Someone heals is because there's at least one other human who is able to understand them and are able to relate to them and harmonically resonate with them and thereby connect with them. And at the heart of all healing and therefore all love is clearly, obviously, without question, I don't need to argue it, a human connection.
But then, why do you feel like as adults we lose that sense of how to communicate properly? Because it feels hard as an adult to be able to communicate than it does when we are younger. What do you think
Yeah.
happens as we get older?
Yeah, I think as adults, there's a 4-letter word. It starts with F. It's called fear.
Yeah,
And that's the word that gets in the way. We all of a sudden start really paying attention to fear as if it's real. And we become afraid that we're going to be thrown off the island or dismissed or disregarded, or disrespected if we say our actual true voice. If we actually speak to another about what we really think about something, we become really afraid. So instead, we do something that's really truly absurd. What we do is we pretend to be somebody that we're not in order to protect the person that we are. Now, when you look at that, you can see that is about the most preposterous, ludicrous, absurd strategy that's ever been designed. First of all, pretending to be someone that you're not is just insane because you can't be someone you're not. And second of all, it doesn't even work. You're still going to be dismissed or disregarded. You're just going to be dismissed and disregarded for things that you didn't really mean to say in the first place because you were pretending to be someone else. So we no longer trust people because we're afraid. We've had our own hearts hurt, our own hearts broken, or we felt like we were defective or deficient or less than and had that, pushed into our face. And we don't want that to occur again. So instead, we decide that not communicating is the safest way to get through the world. So we no longer even say hello to people. We don't have eye contact with people. We don't respect people. We don't treat people like we would want to be treated. Instead, we just survive and, live in our, like you said, a little box and, walk through the world with insulation around us and not even being curious about what another person thinks, especially if they say even one thing that we disagree with. If they say one thing we disagree with, we just disregard them as a human. Like, no, I don't want to even know you. Not only do I not want to know you, I hope you don't live in my neighborhood. And I certainly am never going to introduce my children or my loved ones to you because you said X about Y. That is just, I'm telling you, that is just a recipe for disaster and the dismantlement of humanity as a whole. And that's where we're at here. We're at it's 11:58 or 11:59 p.m. I mean, it's time. Either we're going to get this shit together soon, or literally, it's the end of the world as we know it. Yeah.
Well, exactly, totally agree with that. So, as we said in your intro as well, you're an author. One of the books you wrote is Creative 8 Healing Through Creative and Self Expression. What advice do you give in that book, and what's that about?
Yeah, so the book was written in 2019. I'm proud of the book. Here's what I learned with that book: the Creative 8: Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression. So basically, I felt like there was about 8 different ways to be creative. And what I meant by that were like the visual arts and the performing arts. So art, music, dancing, singing, drama, cooking, writing, and gardening were the original 8. And a couple more have been added over time. Photography and cleaning have been added over time. And even poetry, as some people have said poetry. Anyways, the whole point is that if you do, and when you're in the midst of doing those things, like if you feel like you're depressed or sad or anxious or scared or even tired, or if you feel scattered, or you feel like your mind's racing, or you don't feel antisocial or something like this, if you do one of those things, art, music, dancing, singing, drama, cooking, writing, gardening, even for 1 minute, it activates a whole new pathway in the way you look at the world. You pick up a paintbrush, or you even pick up a pencil, you pick up a pencil like this and even if you do that, you're creating music, and if you can be creative, all of a sudden you'll notice that during the act of being creative, the symptoms that you thought you had, they disappear. They literally disappear while you're being creative. So I ask people in that book to do 3 things a day, 3 of those, choose 3 of those separately per day, and spend an extra 1 minute doing those 3 things. And you'll see that during that time, you no longer have the symptoms you thought you had of mental illness. And not only that, it opens up a pathway for pursuit of creativity and pursuit of what we've been talking about, right? Self-expression and human connection that otherwise wouldn't be made available, and a new sense of self, of a sense of self dignity can show up in that point. A new sense of self worth can show up in that point. And literally, I have watched diagnoses fade away when people use creativity as a means of self expression.
And again, do you feel like it's that fear that stops adults being creative? Because again, as children, we're very creative, and that seems to go as we get older as well. Is that back to fear again?
I do think so. I think it's exactly fear. Here's what happens, in conventional education systems, you're told that that painting was bad
Yeah.
or wrong or not good enough, or you're a bad artist, or you're not a good musician, or you're a poor singer, or you're not a good actor. And when you're told that, you take that on as if it's about you, as if it is. Like when a teacher says that's a bad painting, or gives you a B- on a painting, or it's D+ on a painting, or a dance act or a singing act, then you start realizing, well, sure as heck I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm a bad painter. I'm a bad musician. I'm a poor singer. I'm a bad actor. I don't know how. And I've already been, punched in the head with a red X on the top of my paper while I was growing up. So since I'm not good, I should pursue another part of life. And over time, they all drop off. And all of a sudden, I talk to people every day. I ask them what type of creativity they do. More often than not, especially these days, the answer is I don't do any. I don't do anything. I don't draw, I don't paint, I don't sing, I don't dance, I'm not in drama. I don't play music. I don't do any of that. I'm like, well, why not? Well, because I'm not good at it. It's like, who told you? What is that? What does that even mean to be good at it? I mean, it's not that hard to pick up a guitar pick and start learning how to play the guitar, or to put your fingers on a piano, or to pick up a paintbrush or a pencil. It's just not that hard to do that. And even though you're not Pablo Picasso or, Wolfgang Mozart, you still are fully capable of finding the entertainment and enjoyment that comes from being a creative. All of us. You want to
No,
know what?
sorry.
Yeah, what it takes to be creative is to get through this next minute, because you're already creative. If you have found a way to get to now, you have managed a whole lot just to get to now. You have been totally creative in determining what you're going to do minute after minute and how you're going to arrange your life. That's called creative. And if you can do that, you definitely can pick up a paintbrush. No question about that.
Well, I can totally get what you're saying because I'm dyspraxic, so obviously my motor skills are a bit different to other people, and my artwork was shown in class of how not to do it. So it's gave me a very negative experience with art. And I'll be honest, I have not picked up a paintbrush since I was 15 because
Yeah.
of that. Just every time I have a paintbrush in my hand, I am telling myself the doubt's there. You're not good at this. You were told you were not good at it. Your
Yeah,
work was shown to, and the embarrassment I felt linked in with drawing. So
exactly.
I have not picked up a paintbrush for 24 years. And I didn't think of it the way you just said it. Even if I did it for a minute, I could probably start enjoying it again.
Well, I would love for you to pledge for me and your listeners to pick up a paintbrush this week. Like literally pick one up and then show your listeners and show me, send me your work. Pick up a paintbrush, get some watercolors, it's easy. And get some paper, it's easy. You don't need canvas and oil paints quite at this time. Just pick up a paintbrush and some watercolors and slap a picture together and see how beautiful you'll feel. Literally, how beautiful you'll feel by breaking through this thing of your own creative block that was created by some high school teacher back in the day.
Yeah, what I'll do, I'll make the pledge now. When this episode goes out, the week it goes out, I will post a picture on my Instagram the following couple of days after this episode.
I love
And I'll
that.
thank
That's
you.
fantastic. Super great. I hear you loud and clear. Good for making. I love that. That's beautiful.
So, with you undoctoring, do people come to you and then you try your methods, or how do you get? Is it clients or patients? How do you get that?
Yeah. So the undoctoring is mostly word of mouth, although we're putting together, the whole entrepreneurial funnel thing with, uh, click rates and all of that, opening rates. And we're putting that together. I have a little team putting that together. So I should be able to get more and more referrals. And my podcast appearances are another place where, even like this podcast, who knows, there could be someone who's listening who's really realizes that medications isn't what they want and that they've gone the wrong track by going the conventional psychiatric route. So conventional psychiatry is one of the choices you can make. It's okay. You can go down that route. Most people do. You get uncomfortable and you come down that route. And if you do that, you're likely to be loaded up with some medicines before too long. So, people learn about me, they see me on social media, or they hear me in conversations like this or on stages, and they start realizing that there might be some relief, and that if for the people who are brave enough, courageous enough, they might even start realizing that maybe there is nothing wrong with them in the first place. Now, for those people, I want to make this really clear for your podcast guests, listeners. For those people who are not like this, in other words, they love their diagnosis, they're so glad they have it, they have a great treatment going, they love their medicines, they love their therapists, they can't think of anything better, and they wouldn't want to change it for the world. More power to you. I am not here to tell you to change your route. Please keep doing exactly what you're doing. If you have lived this life and you have found anything that works, please keep doing it. About anything, and not just about mental health. You found something that works, by all means, keep doing it. This is not even speaking to you. Instead, I'm speaking to the hundreds of millions of people that aren't like that. And there literally are hundreds of million people who feel like they are either misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed or overdiagnosed or mismedicated or undermedicated or overmedicated or like medicated and they wish they weren't. And these people are looking for some assistance to change their world. And when we start looking at that, we start realizing that this conversation of undiagnosing is not simple. For instance, in the US, and I imagine in UK as well, once you have a diagnosis, it's on your medical records to stay. Some doctor has the audacity to give you a diagnosis of some psychiatric disorder. That's it, dude. You have it. 10 years from now, when someone looks at your medical records, they're going to see that you were diagnosed with whatever it was. And we've already talked about the discrimination that can take place in that situation. There's the stigma, if you will. So you're already walking around with that red scarlet letter. And, what we really want people to see is that undiagnosing gives you the right to take your life back. And it's not official. I can't always take it off a medical record, but I can treat you like you're a full scale, whole, complete, and perfect human being. And I'm telling you, when you start treating people who aren't used to be treating like a whole, perfect, and complete human being as if they are whole, complete, and perfect, a new level of healing takes place right at that second. You don't need years of therapy. Once you start respecting people, I've worked with prisoners, I've worked with chronic mentally ill patients. Once I start treating them as if they're just like me and you or anyone else, a new level of love takes place. And inside of that human connection, they finally feel heard, maybe for the first time. And from there, a new level of healing takes place, almost invariably.
No, exactly. And also, as we said in the intro, you've got a couple of podcasts. One of them is Welcome to Humanity, and that's becoming a movement as well. Why did you decide to go into podcasting?
Well, I was naturally a podcaster, I think, from the time I was a kid. I told you when I was 3 or 4 years old, I used to like watching my brother speak, and I just wanted to learn to speak. And, and I loved conversations from the time I was a child. When I I spoke a lot. When I was in elementary school, I spoke up a lot. And there's no elementary school teacher who forgot having Fred as a student. I think that's pretty clear. I spoke up a lot, and I spoke up a lot in junior high, and I spoke up a lot in high school as well. And I was just wanting to learn how to communicate. But school wasn't the place to do it. Like, school doesn't really promote open discourse. School instead promotes sitting down, shutting up, and then repeating exactly what the teacher said. It's a way of passing into the next grade. That's not open discourse and communication. So I just longed for communication, and I ended up spending a lot of time during my school years outside of school, and hence that's why I dropped out of school a couple of times. I was spending a lot more time out of school than I was in school, just learning about the world through conversations with important and interesting people. So I've always been a conversationalist. And then, psychiatry, the whole point of that I went into psychiatry was to communicate and have effective conversations. So once that became clear, it became clear even when podcasting became a thing that I would someday be interested in podcasting. And then when Welcome to Humanity became a thing in 2000, I think 17 or 18 is when it really started growing. It was clear that I had a lot of friends and friends of friends that I could communicate with. And I had created about 100, I think 110 or 120 episodes of Welcome to Humanity. So those are already, those are already dropped and ready to go and sitting out there on Spotify and Apple and all the sites. And then I've since created another podcast. I'm not sure exactly why and how I dropped Welcome to Humanity, but right now that's sitting fairly dormant. The other podcast name is called the Healthy Healer. And in that podcast, I really speak to people who have had life experiences that have led them naturally to becoming healers. And people like me, I suppose, people who have had a full life on the side and thought they were going into a field for some sort of reason and ended up being maybe a little bit disillusioned by wherever they went. Then life came by and life them right in the head, and something happened there and there. And then they became, they had their own trials and tribulations to deal with, and then eventually gathered some tools and some gifts and some blessings and some things that they could teach or share with people, and eventually became healers. And these are some of the people that I get to interview on the Healthy Healer week after week.
And also, obviously, you're on here. You guest for a lot of podcasts. Which one do you prefer, hosting or guesting?
I love guesting. Truly love hosting, but I am a free bird in guesting. This is my favorite place to be. I love guesting on podcasts. I am open. I love answering open-ended questions. I love, helping me see where I've been, what I'm about, where I've become. If you're curious about it, I'm also curious about it. And so there's an opportunity to me, for me to be creative with my words, for me to actually create stories that are true and alive and real about my past or about my wants or about my present. What am I really doing, or what is my future about? What do I see on X, Y, or Z? What's my opinion about A, B, or C? I love podcast guesting. I wish I could make a I wish I could make a living out of being a podcast guest.
See, I'm very much the other way. I prefer hosting. I think I've been a guest on 3 or 4 other podcasts, and I feel more comfortable hosting.
I understand. I get it. I mean, look. I love hosting too. I don't. This isn't a kick in the head to hosting.
No,
I love hosting. I just adore podcast guesting though. I have so much fun. You can see I'm having tons of fun with you. This is really fun for me.
well, unfortunately, Fred, we're coming to the end, and it's been an amazing conversation. I'd love for you to come back on in a couple of months. So I've got one last question, and this question I ask every guest. If you could be remembered for one word, what would it be and why?
Hmm. Um. Let's see. I think the word is maybe visionary. I have a positive. I'd like to hang on to the positive outlook of what the world eventually could be. I am fully aware, like everyone, that there are calamities that are knocking on our door that could put us out of commission today,
Yeah,
like right this very second. It could be our last breath. I fully get that, but it's not how I want to see the world. And therefore I get to create a world that is actually goes in a slightly different direction. Despite the calamities, humanity manages to outweigh its, out deliver itself and create an opportunity using AI, using all of our tools, all of our experience, all the things, all the conversations and interactions, all of our mistakes and our human imperfections to actually put together a world that actually works for everybody. A world that really works. Now, I think we're going to have a hard time between now and getting there. But I really love to see that. Wouldn't it be great if mental illness as an entity was completely transformed? The narrative of what mental illness means was completely transformed and maybe even abolished as a concept.
yeah.
Like, what if we could really respect and expect each other to be the people we know we need to be? What if we could come together as humanity for the purpose of creating a world that really works for everyone? And I suppose visionary, if I had to pick one word, sort of like an optimistic visionary.
Well, Fred, that's an amazing word, and thank you so much for your time. And what we'll do, we'll make sure we chuck the links down to your podcast and books and stuff in the description. So, Fred,
For
thank you
sure.
so much for being a fantastic guest.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's really great conversation.